Hello, everybody. Welcome and happy Sunday to our live Q&A for In Search of Darkness 90s. We are with Mr. Robert Kurtzman, an
Hello.
SFX legend.
Welcome.
Um, and I'll briefly give a your resume is way too long, and we'll use the entire hour for me to break down everything you've done. But perhaps best known from his work starting with K&B. He's worked on Misery, Bride of Reanimator, Exorcist 3, People Under the Stairs, Scream, Jason Goes to Hell, The Faculty. But arguably, you might know him most as the director of Wishmaster and the brains behind From Dusk Till Dawn. Lots to talk about. Robert is here to field all of your questions, or at least the ones that are polite. But let's get things going with Robert. Uh, when you were young and you were a movie fan, what first sparked your interest in special effects and special makeup effects and getting involved versus just being a passive observer?
It would have been early films that I mostly probably caught on television, like King Kong and the Jason the Argonauts, any of the Harryhausen stuff, and a lot of the old B movies, like Tarantula or The Giant Claw. I mean, there's so many like weird movies that I just watched as a kid on Saturday afternoon, movies and late night horror host shows. So I just became fascinated with it, and then I discovered there was some magazines out there that kind of covered topics with those artists and those technicians, and I just started kind of following them and getting exact famous monsters of Filmland and then Fangoria, but also like I was kind of a sci-fi geek too. I was into collecting Starlog and Cinefantastique, whatever I could find and read about cool filmmakers.
Now, was that something that those magazines themselves did they sort of indicate to you that you could actually have a career doing this, or was this still very pie in the sky while you were sort of absorbing all this information?
It was pie in the sky. Remember, I when I first started collecting, I was just like 8, 9, 10 years old. So it really didn't become something I was thinking about as a career until you know high school, the end of high school, and even then I went to art school uh, just to because I was an artist growing up. My mother was an artist, and so I had that art bug, and I was always drawing barbarians and half naked barbarian women and and monsters, lots of gore stuff and creature stuff. So it wasn't until like I went to art school thinking I just wanted to be a graphic artist, but my true love was like following monster guys and wanting to create monsters. But I didn't, being from Ohio, there wasn't an outlet back in the 80s for me to think about. It was a pipe dream to go to LA. So
I took I went to took art classes in high school, and I quickly I wanted to be an artist, quote unquote, when I grew up. And I quickly realized that if you had to get up early and be creative at 9 a.m., this might not be the job for me. So were you like a fan of Boris Vallejo's work and
oh
that
yeah,
kind of?
yeah, I collected all those books, the Rosetta books, and any fantasy art book that came out, like There was a lot of coffee table books with like fantasy artists and sci-fi artists, and I would just collect them and have them on the shelf. And anytime I needed inspiration or reference, I would look at it, and that was basically all through high school. That was what I did.
And how did you start to make the transition over? Like, what was your strategy? I mean, were you going to go to college? I sorry, when you were in college, did you ultimately decide maybe I need to sort of zig or zag?
I did. I went to college for a year, Columbus College of Art and Design here in Ohio, and or where I grew up in Ohio. And then, like after a year, I went, "This is not what I want to do." Really wanted to learn how to hone my sculpting abilities and things, and that was kind of like you weren't going to do that the first year or so. You had to go through all this other nonsense that I didn't really, want to deal with. I just wanted to dig in and do the art. And so I quit school after that year and then worked the summer to help raise money so I could go to LA, and basically just went to LA, did like a 12-week makeup course, which was at that time basic. It was a corrective makeup and beauty makeup, and then a little bit of an effects portion of that, which was pretty crude at the time. And so, but it got me out there, and I met some people, and you network, and eventually I got a job after building a really crude portfolio and going out there and trying to get work. So
A huge amount of this is really it's intimidating, especially Hollywood with a capital H, and then so coming to Hollywood and figuring out how to navigate and just making connections, that's arguably the toughest step. But once you find the place and you find your kin, you're pretty good. How did that sort of lead to next steps for you to really starting to know that you were on the right path doing what you wanted to do?
right. Well, it would have been getting my first real job. I mean, I had a couple assistant things on some movies that were never even like real movies, but never came out or got buried. But it was when I got the job at John Beekler's studio, MMI. He was doing all Charlie Band stuff. So all the early work that I learned was at his shop with a lot of other guys the same age who are still working in the industry today, and we all kind of bonded and kind of came up in the industry together even after we left John. So and the way it works in LA, I mean, it did at that time was there was a certain amount of shops, and when you weren't at one studio working, you were sending the word out that you were available to other studios. And if you started to get a reputation as being somebody reliable and talented enough to be able to hand certain duties to, then you were able to get hired at different studios. So you might work on two shows at one studio, and then they didn't have any work, and so you'd jump over to another. So in those days, I was jumping around from Mark Sjostrom's to Stan Winston's to Kevin Yeager's, and various David Miller's, just different places until we started KMB Effects Group back then. So
And is that something also where it seems like the majority of the work that they were doing was all genre work, sci-fi, horror, monsters and makeup? Is that something that was because that seemed like arguably low-hanging fruit in terms of availability? Is that why you kind of stuck with that path, or is that always really your bread and butter of your interest?
it's pretty much the most stuff that comes in. It's either going to be sci-fi or horror related, but over the years we've worked on a lot of stuff that's a lot of comedies that have like comic gags in them, or fat suits or character makeups, things like that. So, but and some things that are superhero related or whatever. But then most of it though is the horror films. It's just it's monsters or creative gore kills. So
And you're becoming at this time a jack of all trades, master of many, arguably. Was there a particular thing that you said, this is my forte? I am best at this. I'm going to try and pursue as much of this kind of blank as possible.
no, I mean every job's different. I don't go after a certain type of job. It's like if there's a lot of things that were thrown at us coming up in the business that we had never done, like animal effects. Like we started out doing gore and sequels to a lot of the horror films that we grew up on. Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers movies, things like that. And then like a movie like Dances with Wolves comes along, and suddenly we do these animals, the buffaloes and everything, and then we did a whole bunch of animal shows after that, and then even giant crocodile movies and things. It was like so it's just a different challenge. And as an artist and a creative type, we always feel like we take on the challenge and then figure out how to make it work. We've never built mechanical buffalo before, but we figured out how to make it work. So, but that's what's fun about the business. That's what's fun about doing this is it's if I had to do the same thing over and over, I'd get bored.
Hmm.
Thank God, like every show has another challenge or a different character or something that I haven't done, or maybe it's the time frame that we have to do it in that is a challenge. But it's it always keeps you on your toes. So
And there's a certain, not a certain, there's a lot of resourcefulness and innovation that's required, because I'm sure they don't back up the Brinks truck to say let's build this, more, unless it's a very large production. Um,
most of it is pulling it out of your ass. Sometimes it's just like, what's the simplest way to approach this to get the shot for the director? I mean, it could be mechanical, or if you don't have the time to build something mechanical, you're literally doing a trick with a piece of string and a duct tape, super glue, whatever. You're you really are just have to figure out the best way to achieve the shot, and it could be along with camera tricks. I mean, that's one good thing. Studying film and watching how movies are made over the years, and like things that you can cheat, like a swish pan and a sound effect, for a gunshot or an arrow hit or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be CGI either, although CGI is great for cleanup work when you want to have something there and you have a string on it and you want to remove the string if you see it, great. But I think it's just you learn tricks as you go along, and it's just part of the education of like film. I always get excited when I see someone do something unusual, and it's done with a camera trick. And nowadays it could be a camera trick and a puppet, and then a blend of CG between two things, and it's just really cool. You go, wow, that worked really well.
there's a great Spielberg has a great one just for Jurassic Park in the T Rex attack. I think a lot of people don't realize that you've got Stan Winston's practical dino attacking, and then there's just a pan over, and the CG dino is walking through.
Right.
And everyone's so with the sound design, the cinematography, the intensity of the scene, you don't think twice about it. But he just pulled like an old fashioned, bait and
Yeah.
switch right there. So for you, when you're especially in this era of the '90s, when there's a lot more CG coming in and so on and so forth, even with the practical effects, you are becoming a student of filmmaking and camera tricks, but you're not necessarily directing yet. So are you? What's the give and take when you're working with a director, saying this is the best way to shoot it, this is the best way to fake it, this is the best way to do it, and the most inexpensive way? Is there discussions ahead of time? Is it a lot of sort of on-set spontaneity?
Combination. Well, usually what happens is there's a lot of talk during pre-production, and you might storyboard out a sequence, and you tell them like, these are the elements with the live actor, these are the elements with the fake, mechanical dummy or whatever, for the head chop or whatever it is, and everything is, as long as you have a battle plan going in, it's usually pretty cool on set. Except no matter what, there's always a wrench that can be thrown into the gear, and filmmakers always have to roll with the punches. If suddenly they have something goes wrong, or they can't get a shot and they have to restage it, whatever. But usually, working with a director, you can figure something out, and with a couple tricks, and same thing, just knowing how to fake something and use sound and everything that's in your toolbox, to pull it off. And so that's kind of the fun thing, is when you're on. It's actually fun when you're on set and you do have something like that, and you all solve it together. I mean, it's not just me and a director. When it comes to an effect, there's the camera guy, and there's the DP, and then there's your stunt people and your props guys and your mechanical effects guys, and usually all together you got a big team of people who can solve something. So
And I'm sure it has a lot to do with the type of director you're working with. If you're working on Misery with Rob Reiner, which is kind of light but very crucial effects at very strategic times, especially using sound effects to sell it. Or you're working with Sam Raimi on, say, Army of Darkness. I mean, what for you comes to mind when you think of those two directors, and how different it is working with their styles?
Well, particularly in Army of Darkness, Sam likes everything. If Sam and Rob paid for all these puppets to be built, they'd want all those puppets in the shot. So it was like every day, how many puppets do you have? Well, we got 20 puppets or 10 puppets and 10 of these background things. And they go, great, put them all in there. And then it would be figure out how to stage all the action for camera. And a lot of times on that show, like Sam would come over and say, can you guys, I need something here, something there, and something there. Can you guys put something together, and I'll come back and you guys demo it for me, and then I'll figure out how the camera finds it. So we did a lot of that. With Rob, on the other hand, that's a completely different style of movie, and so it wasn't about the effects; it was about that moment. But the effect is so simple, compared to like what we had in Army of Darkness, but really effective. I mean, it's a classic scene. It's a very simple gag. We built a couple test things and tested it, and then we had to figure out how to make the foot stay over after the hit, because initially we had like a spring in it, I believe. So you'd hit it and it'd whack, and then it'd go right back. And so Rob wanted it to stay. So of course, on the day before, whatever, we're like sliding a piece of armature wire up there so that it would hold it in position, and all that. But that's, again, like you plan something out, and then the director sees it and says, I'd really like it to, go over and stay over for a second, just a beat, after she hits it. And then you're basically trying to accommodate that.
About a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I broke my little toe, and I can vouch that it stays until you move it back.
On that note, Robert, you worked on the Predator film, and that's notorious because it has two instances of the creature effect. Were you present for any of the like switching of the effects at all? Was there any
No,
stories on set?
no, I didn't go to set. I was in the lab on that one at Stan Winston's. This Stan, of course, came in to redo the creature.
Mhm.
Originally was being done, I believe, by Boss Films, and it wasn't working. So they they came in, and then Stan and his team put together, the new design, and then I got hired on to come in as a lab tech, and then I was sculpting a bit on it. Steve Wang was kind of the key, and Matt Rose on that, and I was happy enough to help them redo a couple hand things that needed resculpted, and then most of the time we were making molds. That's the one thing when I first started that I could always count on. If there wasn't a position as a sculptor or on set makeup or anything, you could always count on. If you were a decent mold maker, you could always count on getting a job molding things. So,
Oh, that's
At,
brilliant.
at what point? At one point, when you're working on a huge variety of projects, I'm sure there's, with the downtime, the gears are turning, saying, "I'm in the presence of all these great craftspeople. Uh, I would love to just marshal my forces and make my own thing." At what point does the idea from dusk till dawn sort of spark in your brain, and you started chewing on it?
yeah, well, I had done some second unit directing and been, a key on a couple sequences in various movies that I had to storyboard and really work out the effects gags on. And then on set, you're kind of running the show. The director's running the show, but he looks to you to go, "Hey, okay, find me the best angle. What's that angle that you guys boarded? Where's that at here? Let's find it." And then you kind of get the bug. I get bit by the bug. I was just like, I think I can do this. Like, prior to that, I always wanted to be a director when I was younger. I was like, oh, I'd love to be John Carpenter. He's my favorite director. And then I got to Hollywood and went on a couple movie sets, my first sets, and realized I didn't know shit. So, I mean, I really didn't know anything about it. What you see about making movies is one thing, and what the reality is when you're on a set is another. And learning how all the departments work together was a big deal for me, because then when I did direct, I knew how to help them helped me achieve what I needed to get done by just being open-minded and creative about, you know, some directors will ask, like, I need 20 of these things for, like, say I need 3 vans that need shot up, and you're only able to get one. Then then what's a creative way of getting around the van? Well, you squib it from the outside and you get those shots, and then from the inside you reveal the same holes that you blew out on the, on the other shot, with just people pulling cardboard off the outside with a light shining through it, and then you get the reveal of the lights, and then you put sound effects in. I don't know, a lot of little things like that, uh, helped out with me as a director. But that's, I got the bug, and then I started working on my own ideas, and I continue to do that. But it's um, Dust Till Dawn was one that I wanted to make because of how contained it was. Like, I really looked at movies like Night of the Living Dead, um, Assault on Precinct 13, movies where people were trapped in a location, and that's, and it's contained, and you didn't have to travel your crew around, because everybody knows, like, one of the big costs on movies these days, there's a number of locations. So if you have to move an entire, trailer, all the trailers and all the trucks and all the crew from one location to another every night, it's just very costly. So planting and being able to shoot in one location and not have, like, all the travel around is why. So I kind of came up with that as a real low budget movie, and it became a bigger movie, once Dimension got involved, and Robert got involved. But originally it was planned for under $3 million movie, and it became much bigger based on the talent and everything. But I'm so happy it did, because it's so cool.
Sure.
We were able to do a lot more. All that stuff was in, kind of, a lot of the gags were in this original story, but we made it much bigger. We just, when it became a bigger film, we just decided to, okay, we're going to do a bunch of puppets, and we're going to do a bunch of suits, and we're going to do, all this crazy gore gags. So
I think, sort of translating for people who don't know how film production works, fundamentally, and I'm sort of reiterating what you just said, a lot of people don't understand that, especially if you want to pull something off with a low budget, you got to shoot, only in a couple weeks, under a month, ideally. Like you said, you really want to sort of have a primary location. You might even though it takes place in one location, you might build that on a soundstage so you can
right,
control it completely any time of the day. I think, like, Wishmaster, for example, might be a great example of that. There's absolute chaos in the opening scene, and I'm sure it took quite a bit of time to film there, but you get to control the environment, correct?
yeah. Well, that was all on a soundstage, which was then, you know, changed over for another group of interior locations after that. We also built the Red World throne room and everything in the tunnels in that stage. Uh, but on that film, we had a lot of, had several weeks of traveling around Los Angeles, with the crew to get all the locations. Um, Unlike, say, a movie like Evil Dead, which you have the cabin interior, the interior and the exterior, and that's it. So you're in the woods for a couple of weeks, and then you're in the interior for a few weeks. But we shot back in those days. There's a big difference between movies being done now, because back in the '80s, when we were doing like Evil Dead 2, we shot for 3 months on that movie. So that movie done today would be 20 days. It'd be a 20-day schedule with that kind of location. But
What was unique about that you guys could pull off 3 months? I mean, was that just being absolutely creative with the budget, or is that because the budget, doubled or more based on what Sam did the first time around, that he just was a kid in a candy
well,
store?
well, he had a lot more money, but it was still a $3 million movie or a $3.5 million movie. So I guess just in those days, 3.5 million, they were able to figure out how to stretch that over 3 months and give Sam, the time he needed to shoot, or that he felt he needed. So,
Going back to From Dusk Till Dawn, you're trying to pull this off on a low budget, at least at first, in terms of wanting to get it made. Um, the fact that you were talking about directing is an absolutely different beast. There's all sorts of politics in the process, and especially if all of a sudden people put a spotlight on your project, you start losing control. How did you manage something that you basically created for yourself? It's an amazing idea. It's something that you could pull off in a very low budget. Next thing you know, careful what you wish for, but it's all good stuff. I'm sure all the things you crossed out, you're like, well, maybe we can go back to this and maybe put this gag back in.
Well, initially, yeah, it was something that I wanted to direct and planned on directing, and was pushing it from the inception to when we actually made it. So it was about 9 years of trying to get it off the ground. It was just a movie that wasn't going to get made until it was time for it to get made. I mean, people just didn't get it. Some thought it was too vulgar. Some didn't get the whole twist of it being two movies that flip halfway through or whatever. And so it took a long time, and it was actually a very, very frustrating road. And at a certain point, me and John Esposito, who was my partner on it, we decided that, hey, if there's interest, I shouldn't be stubborn. I should get a movie off the ground and have an effects gig for our company, and get a producing credit and I get a story credit. I wrote something. So it was that decision. It's like, I could be stubborn and it will never get made, or I can, after 8 years, Robert Rodriguez is coming off of a couple, hit movies. He's got, he's got a great visual style. And when he became interested in it again, it was like, yeah, well, let's make this happen, and it became a bigger movie. And thank God, because, it's now a perennial, I mean, everybody watches it. It's on every year, it's a very popular vampire movie.
Very, very great vampire film. And you worked on a number of vampire films in the 90s in particular. But From Dusk Till Dawn has a very unique kind of vampire inspired by like reptilian creatures far more so than just a dude with fangs. Uh, I take it, was that your inspiration that came with that, or was it someone else who said, let's make them look different?
No, a little bit. A lot. Robert had some input into that, and initially I had more of the bat and rat elements, which we kept in there as well. So those were in the original, but then he went with the more snake stuff when he added in the whole snake dance thing. He wanted the vampires to have all of them a little different look, but definitely for Selma's look, it was going to be reptilian or cobra like. So it was a combination, But that's what's great too, because even the artists in K&B at the time would sketch up things that John Bisson did a ton of sketching, and Shannon Shea, and everybody would sketch out different things, and Brent Armstrong, and then you would see something you weren't thinking of because you got a different perspective on it. So that's what made it unique, I think, is we had a lot of different looks because we had a lot of different creative people working together. So
yeah,
I find it interesting that you work with someone like Sam Raimi, who basically does Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, which is basically making his same movie twice but better. Then you get to work with Robert Rodriguez. He makes El Mariachi and then Desperado. He basically makes the same movie, then same movie better with a bigger budget. What little nuances and tips and tricks did you learn from those guys that you parlayed to Wishmaster?
Oh God. Well, it'd be shooting something when you're on a schedule, trying to get as much in the can as possible and as much coverage. And it doesn't, on a low budget, it doesn't matter how you get it. Both with Sam and Robert, what was great was them getting any not worrying about a big camera on a big rig or anything. It was like grab the camera, drop it on a sandbag, put it on a skateboard, put a stick on it, and have two guys running it. So I mean, it was, or sit in a wheelchair or a refrigerator dolly with an apple box strapped to it, and then you sit in it, let somebody pull you around, so you could follow somebody running a camera from a low angle, whatever. It's like, and that's it. It's the energy that those two filmmakers have an incredible amount of energy in their films, and that they never bore you, no matter, I mean, no matter what, they're not boring. They're engaging movies. So I think that's it. I mean, Sam told me that once too, that everyone can forgive you of your production value, your acting, any, the bad effects, whatever it is. Don't worry about that. Worry about never boring them and engaging them. No matter what, they're enjoying what they're watching, So
You get to a goldfish audience as long as they're not thinking about what happened 30 seconds before, right?
Right.
So how was your experience when you're finally, directing? Wishmaster was not your first, but what was your experience where you were like, I'm in charge now. I'm now shouldering the responsibility, B, in my wheelhouse with lots of effects practically and so on and so forth, but now I've got to work with the actors, all the stuff that is in your toolbox you get to use. How was that experience for you? Was it an enjoyable thing? Was it a stressful thing?
It's always both. It's always both. I mean, I love it. At the same time, I'm my first film, Demolitionist. I shot it in like 20 days in LA, and it was low budget, and we shot it all on short ends on 35 millimeter film. So,
could you real quick explain what short ends are?
Short ends are the leftover undeveloped film stock that is kept at various houses. It's left over from other films. So they usually come in like really short cans. So when you shoot with film camera back then, you were shooting and you maybe had a minute that you could shoot, and then you had to reload or so, so and you were constantly reloading the camera, which when you add that up, takes time out of your day that should have been art that you put on camera. It should have been performances on camera, and it's not. So, so anyway, that was
that's obviously very required in order to be able to pull off a low budget thing. You gotta, film stock is very expensive.
Yeah.
Not to go down the rabbit hole there, but I think people, especially with video now, it wouldn't cross their mind what a short end could or could be.
Right. And the other trick to that would have been trying to find the film stock that was from the same stock, that like not having Fuji stock one day and then Kodak stock the next day, because they have a different look when you go to color time it. So it makes a problem in post, unless that entire scene is shot with the one stock, you know what I mean? So anyway.
Well, and relevant to Demolitionist, a key element, and I'm sure obviously you know this, but a lot of people are unaware that for new directors, unless you've spent a lot of time in an editing bay, you don't realize what you're missing or what you need to get in terms of coverage until you're sitting there at the editing bay saying, oh crap, I didn't get the proper coverage or the insert or what have you. Did you spend time prepping that way?
Yeah, well, I boarded both that and Wishmaster, a majority of the action and effect sequences. So, and then I went in and basically either got what was on the boards or close to it. Sometimes I wouldn't even be able to get something because of the day. Like you're not going to make the day, so you have to cut this scene out, whatever. So you just kind of work around all that stuff. As far as editors go, though, normally if a couple weeks into shooting, the editor comes on board to start assembling just the raw footage, usually doing it for dailies. They may even be on earlier. So you should be able to get feedback from the editor as you're going along. Now, on a short schedule, the problem is they haven't assembled that much to even give you notes by the time you've already wrapped that set. So a lot of times, an editor will quickly look through the footage that was shot, and before you wrap a set to move on to another location, they may call, and I've had them call, and they go, "Hey, tomorrow before you wrap, get the shot of the gun sliding across the floor," or whatever it is, because he's thinking of that little piece. You're thinking of a lot of what you got to get performance wise sometimes. So, and normally you won't have a second unit on a small movie like that.
Yeah, you
So,
answered my next question. I was going to say, you have a second unit director getting that with what from the short end bin, picking that stuff up. How
yeah.
did you connect? What would you say again with the lessons? Moving on to Wishmaster, from the Demolitionist. What were some of the key elements where you're like, I will not make this mistake twice?
Uh, well, it's completely two different movies. But I think the first film I was surrounded by K&B and my friends and my coworkers, a lot of them were bikers in the movie and whatever. But I hadn't really, I mean, other than a few actors that I brought in that I asked favors from, like Reggie and Savini, and you know, um, there was a lot of people and crew members I hadn't worked with before, other than my team,
Mm-hmm.
my effects team. So on Wishmaster, there was a lot of people that I had worked with on different projects over the years. So I was able to bring them on, and it's not just, and all the actors as well, like Robert Englund and Kane Hodder and everybody, but uh, a lot of crew people too, and like Harry Manfredini, and just different people that I felt more comfortable surrounding myself with people that I knew. Um, and that made it a bit easier. And it was also a first kind of studio movie, even though it was a mini studio at the time. It was live entertainment, and so you did have all that, corporate stuff you
Yeah.
had to deal with. So, um, but that was it. And then knowing that, for instance, Jacques Haken shot the movie, and he had shot Nightmare on Elm Street, but also I'd worked with him on a movie called The Hidden.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's kind of weird. Like when I'm looking up crew people or whatever, and someone's brought up to me or whatever, I'll look at I'll look at their IMDb, and somewhere in there, either they've worked with somebody I know, or I've worked with them way years ago, and I'll go, "Oh, damn," or I love the work he did for another filmmaker. You know what I mean? And I was like, "Oh, now I remember that DP."
A
So
lot of people don't realize that people would take the crew sheet, they'd go through it, and they'd start making calls saying, "Have you worked with this person? Are they an asshole? Or are they a good human being?"
right, right. No, absolutely. Because the last thing you want to do is get in a situation where you're combative on the set with
Yeah.
someone like your DP or your AD. So you want someone there to support you and not try to circumvent you, or you want to be collaborative at the same time. Because I love ideas when they fly out. When another person comes up with an idea, it's just like, oh, that's golden. We got to use that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no reason to have an ego and not, or be so insecure that you don't use someone else's idea if it's a good idea. So
And part of that being a director is really getting everyone on support, to support you. You have to convince everyone that you have a vision and have them come on board with your vision. And I mean, are you the I give a speech on the first day saying let's make a great movie type, or what
yeah,
what are some of the tactics you have to use as a director to get people to do what you want?
yeah. Usually, you'll have a little pep talk on a first day, but a lot of it is in pre-production. So like you're at the props department room and going through that stuff with them and talking about what needs to be built, and the physical effects guys and how we're going to blow up a car, whatever it is. So I think you get that kind of connection is made early on, and if it's not, if and ahead of getting to set if it's going to be bad, and then you have to figure out whether you're going to replace someone or just stick with it and work it out. I've been lucky enough where I haven't had anything drastic happen, with conflicts and stuff. So
Sure.
Knock on wood.
yeah,
Carpenter,
I would.
I know many directors do this, but yeah, Carpenter obviously is very well known for. He wants it to be a painless process because everything else is painful.
Yeah.
So he wants to make sure he's got his loyal crew on screen and behind the scenes. Absolutely.
Well, that's why. Well, like with John and with Wes, I mean, there was a series we worked on like 5 or 6 movies with each of those directors, and it was always that crew. It was always the same costumers, same DP, same props. It was the same group together all the time. So it was like a family unit.
And
On the notes of that, you did work on several Freddy Krueger films. Um, and earlier you mentioned that you don't like doing the same thing again and again. Is it preferable to work on sequels to films, or like again in the '90s you did a bunch of vampire movies? And I imagine that with vampires you can only do so many different tricks to make a vampire kill look
Well, that's
different.
why.
So
Yeah, that's why we went all out crazy on Dust Till Dawn, because we didn't want to do Lost Boys and stuff again. Because you had the Buffy the Vampire Slayer looks and you had the Lost Boys looks, and that was kind of what everybody did after that. And we're like,
would you say
nah, we're
then
gonna go a little crazy with this one.
yeah, absolutely. Go balls to the wall. But would you say then it's preferable to work on like a sequel to a film like Freddy because he can have such creative
um,
differences?
well, back then we were excited just because we were a new company and we wanted to work. We were excited about working on all those sequels, but like, I mean, if you called me to do a sequel to something I, I wouldn't be that excited. Although I can't, the new Halloween movies, Chris Nelson did some amazing stuff in. But I mean, I don't, just doing the mask again and everything. It's so everybody's done it, So it's
Mm.
I'm not. I'm more excited if it's something that, even if it is a sequel, what's new in it, and is there a character or a creature that is not from the first film, was not in the thing. It's something new that you can kind of attack and say it was your own. I mean, for instance, we did Pumpkinhead 2,
Mhm.
and it's, the first Pumpkinhead, classic monster. um, and the second Pumpkinhead, we just, our monster was bigger. It had similar look pretty much, but it was more muscular, thicker than based on the performer. It
Mm.
wasn't as thin and lanky as the original. You know what I mean? But you're trying to make it yours, but it really isn't. Because somebody else had already designed it. So
on Pumpkinhead 2, are you calling Tom Woodruff and say, would you come back and perform? Are you saying,
no,
at least we got to get a guy on stilts? What's your thought process with something
yeah,
like
we
that?
had a different actor, Mark McCracken, who was on stilts and a wire gag. Same thing. He was just he was thin, but he wasn't as thin as Tom at so the suit is just bulkier, So, but and then you see the difference between the two and how they photograph it. And you can definitely tell the difference in those two movies. But
You didn't have, Doug Jones on speed dial back then.
yeah, it, it's probably too busy. And I'm sure, I mean, Tom was working at Stan's back then. So,
Mhm. And so,
yeah.
when it comes to the pressures on the set, for you're aspiring to, and then you're getting to work with Wes Craven, you're getting to work with John Carpenter, so many directors. Is this the kind of stuff also where you're watching them manage how they troubleshoot, how they put fires out, how they deal with the suits on the set? I mean, are you kind of by absorbing by osmosis as much of this as possible?
Absolutely. A lot of it's more creative for me to watch what they do creatively. A lot of the drama or things that may be happening with with production and the producers or the studio, they keep that a lot. They keep that away from the crew for the most part. Sometimes you hear about, why is he in a bad mood today? Well, I guess they're giving him grief about this. You're not really sure. So I mainly like kind of watch how they set up things and how they're approaching an effect shot or a stunt sequence or a chase sequence or something. I love that stuff. So
Now, you're also talking about stunts and chases and stuff like that. Stunts are a huge part of genre film. Wishmaster, I'll go back to that one. I mean, people are flying against the wall, and safety is obviously of utmost concern. I would think getting the right stunt coordinator that you trust. Your neck is on the line as well. What's sort of the approach when you want to do a million gags that involve flying bodies?
yeah, it's a combination of things like working with stunts and pyro department and safely blowing up what looks like a big explosion, but it might be a very small explosion. No matter what, if it has fire, it's a dangerous thing. So, and there's flying debris thing just from like air cannons shooting cork out to make it look like debris flying. Cork hurts when you get hit by it.
Yeah.
So it's better than getting hit with the real shit, but it still hurts. So all that stuff has to be just carefully planned out and the just to the best of everyone's ability. But that's why every department on a movie set should be kind of on a day like that. Everybody should be on their toes and speaking up if they see something that may be potentially dangerous. Bring it up. You know.
Did you find, like sort of in the wake of the tragedy with, Brandon Lee on The Crow and so on and so forth, that, but even before then, John Eric Hexum, with a blank, some unsupervised situations do sort of come through. Does that make everyone sort of pause and double down on safety? What's it like sort of behind the scenes with stuff like that?
Well, yeah, normally. I mean, normally there's a safety meeting, especially when it's pyro or stunts involved or weapons, and you have your props person and you have your mechanical effects people there, and they'll tell you what they're doing. We're going to do this. There's going to be a 2 count. We're going to have these size explosions going off. We got this load in the guns. They are blanks, and then they show you the unloaded weapon, and then they say we're going live. There's a big process, and on a film with the proper AD department and everything, that stuff is run properly. And I'm not saying there's things can't happen, but they really try to minimize the potential of anything bad happening. So,
Of course. Now, after getting a taste of directing a bunch of times, do you sort of look at new projects that come your way and consider, do I want to direct this? Do I just want to do, do you seek out, are you continuing to seek out projects for yourself to direct? Do you find you're much more comfortable working on a variety of films doing effects? What's your
no,
comfort zone?
yeah. No, I like doing both. I'm working on a couple scripts with Marcy and my son, and then I have a couple things that people are talking to me about that they're at least a while off as far as directing. But I like I have no problem dropping back and doing the effects for another director. You know what I mean? I just and I don't really overstep my bounds either. On a set, I'm there to help him facilitate or her facilitate their vision. So I'm just so gung ho to be working on a film in a creative capacity and with other creative people that I doesn't really bother me. Yeah, I get antsy. I'm like, yeah, I want to direct again, But at the same time, as long as I'm doing something creative, which effects work is like something I probably will never stop doing. So, but at least on my own films. I mean, if I had it my way, I would probably just do the effects on my own movies. If I had like a bankrolled um, production company and I could just like work on my own films, I would probably not do anybody else's films, but maybe a few close friends. That's it.
Would you set up a studio in Ohio? What's the advantage for you of sort of getting away from the bright light of Hollywood for you?
Well, I mean, we're kind of in we're in Atlanta a lot, which is the second film hub uh, outside of LA. I think doing it outside of the system is always fun with a different, without that corporate kind of thing. But it's almost impossible to do a movie without some sort of corporate
Yeah.
structure financing it now, unless you're doing it the old independent way, like Evil Dead. You got a bunch of dentists and stuff investing, but um, but I think I just I don't care where I do it. I just love doing it. I think ultimately Ohio is where our families are, so that's one reason to come back and make movies here. But like Atlanta is a really cool place to work. It's so different than LA. Like I'm not an LA guy, not anymore. I mean, I kind of never was. In my early 20s when I first moved out there, it was like, ooh, this is fun. It's new. I haven't seen any of this. I mean, this whole scene is different. Then it gets old. Like after 10 years, you're like, ugh, you know. So, and that's just the Midwestern kid in me. You know what I mean? I'm still a Midwestern guy. So
I mean, out of curiosity, what is sort of the big difference in your mind? Shooting in Atlanta. I know they do. Greg Nicotero's there doing Walking Dead all the time, and what's it is sort of the everyone was going to Canada, and now
Mhm.
it seems so many people are going to Atlanta. What's sort of the appeal?
um, the appeal is the tax incentive, but
Mm.
the and the cost of making movies in LA, the cost of everything in LA is add 20% to your movie. Um, so I think that's the big thing. But I think the other thing is like when you're in Atlanta, you're in Ohio, when you're anywhere but LA, when you leave work, you're not living the film industry 24/7. In LA, that's all you do. There's not. I mean, you can try to get away, but everybody that you hang out with is in the film business, and I mean, it's just no matter where you go, it's all about people breaking into entertainment. So um, I
It's
think
like
it's really
it's like the coworkers when you get together with lunch. Like, let's not talk about work, and then five
yeah,
minutes later, what else is there to talk about,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So you know, here or in Ohio or Atlanta, it's the you can literally just break away. Like we can go canoeing one weekend. We're just like, yeah, let's go canoeing. It's like, and you're not driving like 100 miles to do something. It's like, boom, boom, boom. It's like anyway.
But with the time that we have left, I'd
Okay.
love to talk a little bit about your upcoming projects that you'd like to talk about, or anything that you can sort of shed light on in terms of what you're doing currently, and what you got around the corner.
Okay. What I can't talk about what we're on right now because they haven't announced it.
Okay.
The one that we're getting ready to shoot, but it is the first film that we've been on since the strike. So
Aha.
yeah. So the last thing we had, what? Marshmallow. Oh yeah, yeah, right, right. We do have a movie called Marshmallow coming out with that Danny Del Purgatorio directed and Warner Davis produced, who was we did Black Friday with.
Hmm.
And that's coming up soon. I think they're getting ready to announce a bunch of stuff because they just finished post on it. And we shot that last June, May, June, yeah, right before the strikes
Yeah,
hit.
right before the strike
Yeah,
started. So
so
you finished under the wire, huh?
yeah. So in the main,
Mention the curse.
huh?
I mentioned.
Oh, the Curse. We did the Curse, the Emma Stone series, or Emily Stone,
And
and
Nathan Fielder.
Nathan Fielder, right?
Mhm.
Which is on Showtime. Um, and then during the whole strike period, I did a bunch of original oil paintings. That's how I kept from going nuts. So I painted like 25 paintings.
What's the type of theme or subject matter you like to paint to relax?
Oh, it's always related to genre most of the time. I did do one uh, scenic thing, a picture that Marcy took of a landscape um, on a trip, and I painted that for her. But most of the time, it's like I did a bunch of old sketches from Wishmaster and did them as color paintings. I did some old pencil sketches that I had done years ago and decided to blow them up and do them in color. So there's just, and then I did like, I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 originals that weren't based on anything, but
Haunting of Hill House.
I did some Haunting of Hill House. I did 3 of the characters from that.
Check out
That Neck Lady.
They're on sale on the website.
Yeah, they're all on the website. Robert Kurtzman makeupeffects.com. So.
Oh, great.
I'm sorry, mufx.com.
Uh-huh.
But
do you have a favorite movie monster then that you like always vision as like the perfect movie monster?
Oh, it's always the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Creature from the Black Lagoon.
That still like even holds up today as like an incredible suit. Yeah, exactly. So, and then I guess if I was growing up today, I'd have to say like A Shape of Water or something, or that kind of that quality. Actually, one of my favorite is the Gillman from Monster Squad. So there's like, yeah.
I love the freaky guy from Evil.
The freaky guy from Evil. Yeah, there's some cool stuff now. But
do you personally? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, do you kind of struggle with all this IP where they're constantly trying to make another because enough time has gone by? Even John Carpenter was going to make a '90s version of Creature from the Black Lagoon. You bring in like Rick Baker to do something. There's a maquette made, but these things aren't quite made. Is that just sort of the nature of the business for you, or do you personally? If John Carpenter can take a Howard Hawks film and make what he made with Rob Bottin on The Thing, do you feel like there's always room for optimism and possibility with like another creature movie?
Oh, absolutely. They just have to put it together the right way and the right team, and then, I mean, I'd hate to see that movie done with a big CGI version that's just. I don't know. I just don't want to see that myself. But when you look at Shape of Water and how they did that with a performer in a suit, that's the connection they would need to make with that film. And but I'm optimistic about a ton of movies. When I was a kid, if I heard that it was being remade, I'd probably be really excited initially, and then I'd go, well, it depends. Some movies need to be remade because at the time they were really B movies. Maybe the effects aren't that great, but the storyline was awesome and you want to see it updated. And then some you don't want to touch. Like you don't want to touch Jaws and just go, we're going to remake Jaws, but we'll have a CG shark. Like, okay,
at least it will work.
We'll see. But
I'm still waiting for a remake of Wasp Woman. I really need to see a better
Wasp Woman.
A better creature with that. If there, with the time that we have left, is there a particular, if you could grab anything from your childhood to be remade, what would you want to do? What is monster centric to you that you would love to take advantage of?
Well, something that hasn't been remade, but I've heard rumors of it over the years, but I've always wanted to have remake Them.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, other than that, I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Most of them they've remade, like Humanoids from the Deep. I always thought that would be cool, and then they remade it, but they didn't. They remade it almost the same way they made the original, so it was kind of like.
And then eventually you get Joe Dante saying, "Why remake it shot for shot?" It's it's crazy, psycho, obviously. But Thank you so much, Robert Kurtzman. It's been an absolute pleasure sitting down with you again. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your insight with our audience, and best of luck with your future endeavors. Please plug your site again so we could all check it out after we get off.
Robert Kurtzman, MUFX.com.
Absolutely. Robert's going to be in Search of Darkness 90s, part 1 and part 2. Thank you, Marcy, for making this happen today as well. And everyone, take care. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Oh, there she is.